All right, there we go. All right, so we're rolling, and this
Okay.
is, as I said, informal. I'm so happy to be spending some time with my friend Ben, the person who counsels me. So if you're watching this and you're a member of the Tabernacle, if you want to know who helps me stay on the right road, you're looking at him. I
Wow.
come to him with a bunch of stuff, but he helps me as a friend, as a guide,
I'm glad to
and
hear
as
that.
a counselor. So,
Yeah.
Ben, if you don't mind, first, just kind of tell our audience a little bit about you,
Yeah.
and then we'll jump into a few things here.
Yeah. Well, my name is Ben Bosme, and um, I've been married for almost 30 years. We have two kids. Our son Anthony's 27, and our daughter Amy's 23, and they're out of the house, and but we are close family, so we stay very close with each other. And I grew up in India. Um, when I was 18 years old, I left India to get my theology training, undergrad theology training, and then after that, um, I got my training in counseling. And I've been counseling, oh man, informally it started, like counseling was part of our training in seminary right away in 94 when I started seminary. And so in a way I've been counseling since 94, but I started doing it like really full time, like this was my main job since 98. And so
Right.
it's been a few years. In 98 is when we moved to St. Louis to be involved in counseling ministry. And God has blessed us. God has blessed the ministry. God has healed a lot of people. Um, around St. Louis and around the country now. So I'm very grateful for His favor on our ministry, and I just love watching people be healed of the wounds and the scars we all carry throughout our lifetimes. So it's a little bit about me.
Wow.
Yeah.
Well, thank you for sharing that. And as you can see, he has a history, and I will just tell you, he has been involved and helped a variety of people, not just pastors and what you would call church leadership, but just across the gamut and spectrum. So
Yeah.
um, I'm grateful that God has allowed our paths to cross. So I want to jump right into it. We're heading into what is called Holy Week. We are um, approaching Resurrection Sunday,
Mm-hmm.
and this can be a busy time of the year.
Yeah.
And then you add in everything that has happened over the last year
Yeah.
and the impact that we've all experienced. And so I, want to talk briefly over these next few minutes to try and get, what I believe would be some practical tools and nuggets to people.
Mm-hmm.
And looking at Matthew 11:28, Jesus says, "Come to me, all you who are heavy laden, and I will give you rest." And
Mm-hmm.
as we were talking before, recording started, oftentimes that rest is referred to as just physical, but
Yeah.
there's so much more to rest than just a physical aspect. And
Mm-hmm.
so, I want to deal with this idea of, how do we allow our minds to
Mm-hmm.
rest? And so, if you don't mind speaking to that, what some practical things, as well as talk about some things we should be on the alert for that you've seen really in this last year with the pandemic and all that's happening around us.
Yeah. Well, I mean, let me jump off that scripture. Come to me, all you have, heavy laden and burdened. I will give you rest. And he goes on to take my yoke. My yoke is easy. And so the idea of yoke in that passage is very, very important. It is talking about, like I grew up in India, of course, and so they didn't have tractors when I was growing up to cultivate the land, and so they would put two, bulls and they put this yoke around them, and then they attach the tiller to the two bulls, male cows, and they would till the land. And so, the yoke would hold them in place, like that, so that, that's how they were controlled through the yoke. And that's the yoke, that's the idea. And so in Jesus's time, there were rabbis who had what they called their philosophy, their philosophy about God, philosophy about everything. And that philosophy was considered yoke. And so, for example, one rabbi, his philosophy would be, you know, as long as you tithe 10%, God will save you and you're good to go. And you have to follow that law. If you do X, Y, and Z, and all the rules and regulations that the religious leaders put on people, that was the yoke, that Jesus was talking about. Of course, it's more than physical rest now, because what we believe drives our behavior, and I was just talking to a pastor friend of mine. He said, well, my goal is to make sure that everybody else is taken care of before I take care of myself. It just struck me, that's his yoke, right? So if
Mm,
he's following that yoke, he's going to be always tired,
yes.
because it's what he believes in his mind and his heart that God is calling him to do that, when it's not what God is calling him to do that. That's where Jesus says, take my yoke on me. My yoke is easier than that burden, where you don't have to be so tired all the time, mentally and physically and emotionally. So that's the idea of the yoke. It's a very powerful scripture, because Jesus is really saying, all these rabbis are going to put rules and regulations on you. Keep your Sabbath. Don't do anything on Sabbath. If your
Yeah.
donkey falls in the well, don't mess with it. And other people say, well, it's okay if you do the donkey, but you don't take water, to feed your animals. The Sabbath was a big deal, and rabbis had their opinions or their philosophies about what that meant to keep the Sabbath holy. So that's where Jesus is saying, my yoke is easy, right? So now it
Yeah.
bears on us powerfully, because when we look at the pandemic and everything is falling apart, to say the least. Okay, that's like the mildest way of saying what's happened. I
Yeah.
can't even begin to find words, and I'm good with words, to describe what we've been going through. Nightmare doesn't even compare. Tornado, maybe. Everything is falling apart. Nothing. You can't grab onto anything, right? And so when you are in the middle of that kind of a storm, what do you believe in? Who do you
Mm,
believe in?
wow. That's good.
Okay. And so do you believe God meant what he said? Psalm 91 is a great one. Psalm 23 is another one. Even when I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will not fear evil, because your staff and your rod, they comfort me. Now, these circumstances begin to challenge that, not not just, to show you up if you don't believe in that, but also to practice it now,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And this is my yoke, even when I walk through the valley of the shadow of death. I need not fear evil.
That's good.
So now the whole yoke and the rest idea, not an idea, the practice of that becomes very powerful and purposeful now too. Okay. And
Yeah.
so when you rest, there's a purpose to it now. So anyway, I just
No, you said so much that was great there, particularly um the yokes that we pick up.
mm-hmm. That yoke that
Talking
other people
to
put on us.
yeah,
Yeah.
and the ones we put on ourselves
Yeah.
by, looking at our relationship with Jesus as work based versus being grace based. So when
Yes.
it's work
Right.
based, I'll say things like, I've got to do all of this um,
To be
because
loved
I'm
by
the
God.
pastor, you know.
Right. To be loved by God, to be approved by God, or to be loved by my friends, or to be
Yeah,
approved by my parents. Yeah.
Yeah,
It's widespread like that. Yeah. Keep
it
going.
does. It does. And it spreads beyond just being in church leadership. It could be, I've got to be this for my family. I've got to
Mhm.
be this for this person or this place, versus what Jesus says here is come to me.
Yeah.
He's saying don't go to other persons and other places or even to
Yeah.
your possessions. He's saying
Yeah.
come to me. You
Yeah.
said something in that though that I really want to dig into just for a little bit,
Sure.
and that is um, that idea of how then we practice this,
Yeah.
because all of us, I think, if have picked up along the way some type of yoke from being in a pandemic
Mhm.
and seeing, tragedy, and many of us experiencing either firsthand COVID or, losing a loved one to it. And so how what does practice now begin to look like in this kind of environment of, and you mentioned some great things, Psalms 91 and Psalms
Yeah.
23. What does this practice of this look like now for us mentally?
Well, I mean, I think the first thing, again, we were talking about normal, new normal, all of that, which is just, popcorn kind of conversations, if you ask me.
Yeah,
You know, um, you know, it, what it means, it begins to, you know, expose to us. This is where a lot of things could get exposed in us, about what we expect from life, and what we think life ought to be, what we think relationship with God, friendships ought to be. And so, for example, one of the heartbreaking things that I've heard over and over again is loved ones dying, and you can't even, you know, have a funeral. You can't say goodbye. You can't have a memorial and remember them and celebrate them. So we feel a bit cheated, too, very cheated by that. Okay, and so death has happened through COVID. Death has happened, to younger people, to older people, and a very close friend of mine committed suicide, and that was horrific, and so, and there was just no way to say goodbye. I'm saying, how do I say goodbye? And so we all have this idea, a dream or a fantasy maybe, or an expectation of what this is supposed to look like. And if it doesn't look like that, we are troubled by it because we're worried that we did not honor them properly. Number one. Number two, we're worried, okay, I mean, this is a change. How do I know this is what I think it means to say goodbye to a loved one that passed away? And it was horrible. The whole experience is horrible, and then I think the more significant thing is isolation.
yeah,
Isolation in that, you know, the more I learn about how we're made, how we're designed by God, the more I'm just in awe of how He created us. And so, isolation is pretty horrific in my books,
yeah,
because um, when we spend time with each other, you know, physical presence, when we spend time with each other, we regulate one another. Just being in the presence of somebody physically can be a comfort. Okay. You
yeah.
can't hug, you can't 10,000 emojis will not
Right.
comfort you
Right.
as
Right.
much as a person's hug, holding, weeping with one another, you know,
Yeah.
walking this through. And I think that's been very, very, again, that's a normal that's a God designed normal. It's not my expectation. It's not the culture's expectation. It is how God designed me. And okay, so in the middle of all of this, what I started hearing was, well, we have a new normal about churches, how church is going to be done. It's going to be virtual from now on in. I said, if you go down that road, you're going down a dark path because it will not work. If we're not together in person, we were not going to be ministered to, I guarantee it, because that's how we're made. We cannot, we cannot put a square tire on the car and expect it to be a smooth ride.
Yeah.
And so I think that's been very painful for all of us, is this isolation, is like I'm alone. And it's painful to visit with your, it's the best you can do right now. I get that, you know, to visit your loved one through a window, a glass window. That's painful. It's worse than not seeing them at all. But but I think we all had an expectation when we started hearing about COVID, about the nature of this virus. And in our minds, we put a time limit on it. We
Yeah.
thought, oh, it might last 2 weeks. We've been through H1N1 and all of this, Ebola, but it kept dragging on and on and on. That also began to contribute to feeling discouraged by not knowing when is this going to end. And so those are things that have contributed to our anguish, this anguish of the soul, going, I long to be in personal contact with my loved ones, be it at church, family, friends. You cannot do without. You will die if you don't have human contact. And human contact is also very, very healing to people. A lot of diseases are, you can handle a lot of diseases, through loved ones care for you through human contact, and we can never expect and so to live without it. But we've had to, for a good reason, of course,
Yeah.
because we didn't know how this virus operates and what the nature of this is. We don't know, and so we just had to isolate. And for a temporary, it's a good thing to do. It'll save a lot of lives, I understand that, but it also takes a toll if you're not aware of why you're feeling as bad as you do. And a lot of us feel bad and we don't even understand why. And so I'm hoping that some of these nuggets will help, bring down
Mm,
the level of stress, going, I'm not weird, I'm not strange, I'm not asking for too
right.
much, you know, and that can be quite stressful in the middle of feeling all of this, to see yourself as you're crazy, or you're not doing something right, or things like that. Well, I don't know if I answered your question
No,
there or
you
not,
did.
but some thoughts.
No, you did, because I agree. I've been in conversations where, some have thought, I've been in both extremes. I put it this way in terms of conversation, that church will just go back totally as it is and not miss a beat. And I've been on the other end of conversation, we'll never be in person again. And I think the reality is we will always live in this hybrid world, because we were headed in that world even before COVID hit, truth be told.
Hmm.
So I think COVID sped it up for some. Uh, for others, it may have made them opt out, and some churches have dissolved. Um,
Yeah, and COVID forced it on us too.
yeah, it forced it on us, no question.
Right.
And so I think now, as we're coming out of this,
Hmm.
let's for a moment talk recovery, because what you're talking about is first identifying. In order for me to have rest, is I have to identify these emotions and know that those emotions are not wrong, they are real. I'm
Hmm.
hardwired from heaven this way to be in community.
Yes,
So
absolutely.
as Jesus is saying, come to him, one aspect of that is he's saying, come to me and take on my yoke. Part of the recovery is taking off the burdens that,
Yes.
whether it's COVID, whether it's financial stress because of losing jobs, whether it's, like you said, grief, we'll talk about that in a moment.
Hmm.
Whatever it is, bring it to him and take this yoke on. So here's the recovery. I have to release and
Hmm.
then put on. I have to put off and put on, right?
Yes.
So now, as we talk put on, you know, what does putting on begin to look like in this hybrid world? Because it's not just church that's going to be hybrid. It's restaurants, it's movie theaters, it's um, shopping, grocery stores,
Yeah.
clothing, you name it,
Yeah.
has now shifted.
Mhm.
What does recovery look like? How what does community look like? And how do we deal with, like you said, the idea that we were forced into isolation,
Mhm.
forced into separation. Now how do as we come out of this, how do we deal with that?
Yeah. Well, again, because again, the context matters. Why are we asking these questions? We're asking these questions because of COVID, you know. So that's important because now it gets you to prioritize, what is priority number one, to make sure that I don't contract the virus,
Yeah.
right? And so now self care becomes, what do I need to do to not contract the virus or pass it on, not purposely, of course, and so we have to be prudent about that because we can't take our eye off the virus yet because there's so much conflicting information we don't even know who to believe in anymore. And so we're kind of needing to sift through, you know, what is real about the virus and do the best we can. So that becomes priority number one. So as I do that, the priority number two is to understand what effect is it having on me. Okay. What effect? Okay, so let's just go with the isolation. Well, isolation, the effect it's having on me is depression, or if you have been stuck with your family, you might be struggling with impatience, irritability, to anger, to, a number of things, and so you have to understand what effect is it having on me. And so, I have a friend who's an ER doctor I was talking to. He was completely today. I was talking to him today. He said, I have seen a significant increase in violence. I said, what do you mean? He said, stabbing, shooting, beating up, you know, all kinds of violence is on the rise. Okay, so we got to look at what's going on here. I mean, just because somebody else is violent doesn't mean everybody's going to be violent. It might affect different people. So you have to ask, okay, how is isolation affecting me? Am I feeling down? Am I feeling anxious? Am I feeling hopeless? Am I feeling like no one loves me or it's not enough, to visit on Zoom? So take some time to identify the precautions you're taking, which are necessary for your life, and then ask yourself, how is it affecting me? Okay. And so,
Yeah.
for me, I'll just use myself as an example here, is that I just went through an injury which kept me from doing things I used to do. I've realized, I haven't exercised in a while, at least 4 or 5 months. And I start seeing the effect of that with back problems, you know, and sometimes, like, not feeling up. I feel a funk,
Yeah.
I feel more tired. And so I'm noticing that and I'm saying, okay, I need to get out and just walk. If I just walk for 20 minutes. And so that's important to me because um, breathing fresh air is so important. It is so important. And so let's just say, for example, you might be feeling anxious. You know, well, how important is breathing to anxious? Very important. What happens is when we're anxious, we automatically take shorter breaths. When
Mm.
we take shorter breaths, there's not enough oxygen going to the brain for the brain to function properly. So the anxiety keeps getting worse and goes into panic attacks, and other anxiety related issues. And so if you're feeling anxious, get outside and take deep breaths for 5 minutes if you need to. Just do that. And just that fresh air, taking deep breaths. Again, I'm impressed with the SEAL team. That's the ultimate warrior in my mind. And one of the things that they need to learn first is how to do deep breathings, because they go on missions where they have to, keep their anxiety in check, because if they don't, then they're going to blow the mission. And so what they do is I like, this is what I practice in my life is I take my breath and I count to four, and I hold my breath and count to four, and then I breathe out, counting to 4 on however long you want to take. And that just puts you in a bit of a discipline on how to do that and what, deep breathing looks like. And so there are things you can do before you run to the doctor and say, give me medicine because I'm anxious. That's
Mm,
not always the first, line of treatment. There are things you can do. If you need to exercise, if you need to walk, if you need to, don't think about it as, oh, I need to lose X amount of weight because I've got, what do they call it, quarantine 15 or something.
yeah.
Don't worry about that. Don't worry about that. Do this because this is good for you. And sometimes rest looks like activity.
Mm, okay.
Okay. And if you are, okay, so let's just say you have a job where it hasn't slowed you down over quarantine. Maybe you're a doctor, maybe you have a job, you're an essential worker like nurses and all kinds of first responders, and you've been going, going, going. For you, it becomes about slowing down and sitting, you know, and giving your body the rest it needs, like making sure you get 8 hours of sleep, as much as you can help that. That sleep is also very, very powerful, because what happens to the body when you're sleeping is very powerful. One of the things that happens to your body when you're sleeping is the body goes through, you know, and takes care of all the wear and tear of a given day and gets rid of all the debris that you've brought on psychologically, emotionally, and physically.
Mm,
Okay, so the rest the body needs is 8 hours, because it needs to go through and see all the wear and tear that your body's taken on and heal that. Okay, so if it needs 8 hours and you get 6 hours, you just, it's like getting out of the operating table, when the doctor fixed whatever and he's got like 8 more stitches to go, and you're like, oh, that's it, we're gonna go now. That's what you're doing to your body. So sleep, rest, breathing, simple things like that go a long way, in trying to cope with the challenges, COVID is presenting. And so for some of you, it just means you need to laugh. You need to laugh. Okay. Okay, get your favorite comedian to make you laugh. Start laughing.
yeah.
That's important, because scripture says laughter is an amazing medicine. It makes a heart glad when you laugh. And so try that. If you haven't laughed in the last week, put something on, or read a comic, something funny, read joke books if you need to. Laugh. That's so powerful. And so there are things that we deny ourselves because we think we need to be serious Christians and we're not allowed all that. But no, yes, you are. This is how God made you, and you can't go against the design of how God made you and expect to do well and be healthy.
Wow.
And so that's rest. And so what we're talking about is like, one size doesn't fit all. That's what I want to
Right.
emphasize. It has to be intelligent, right? I
Yeah.
call it intelligent self-care.
Mm, that's
Okay.
good.
Go ahead.
Oh no, that's good. Keep going.
Yeah.
I'm loving
Yeah.
this.
Yeah. And so, and these are things you can do day to day. And then, diet begins to make sense too, in that, like, okay, if your diet is off and you've been eating too much sugar, well, you can pretty much bet that you're struggling with arthritis, at least, if not something else, and the energy level up and down, so, be kind to yourself and eat well, eat properly, eat nutritiously, make sure everything that goes into your mouth by way of food has nutritional value, or it's not going in, because what's the point? Because you're not getting any benefit out of it anyway, and then it turns into something you don't want it to. And then we got all kinds of other, secondary and tertiary problems with that. And so, so now we begin to, put the basic things in place now. Okay.
Yeah.
Eating well, sleeping healthily, exercising properly, I'm not saying you need to lift 300 pounds 6 days a week. I'm just saying just take a walk, do as much as you can. It doesn't have to be, oh, I got to be able to do this or I'm not good enough, because that's a yoke now. All right. And
Yeah.
so, we're looking at God, Jesus saying, my yoke is easy. And we're looking at simple things, like easier things to do that are consistent with scriptures, right? So food and sleep and all of that. If you doubt me, read the story of Daniel. You know, they get captured and they go into this country where the king is just the meanest man you can imagine. And he says, well, I mean, you're going to eat all this stuff. And Daniel goes, well, maybe not. And the butler says, well, I mean, if you don't eat what I give you, you know what happens to me. He says, I'm going to get killed. He said, well, I mean, I'm going to negotiate with you. You know, I'll tell you what, you give me what I think I should eat that's healthy, and you give everybody else what they want to eat healthy. 10 days later, we're gonna compare ourselves and see who's healthy. And so sure enough, Daniel and his buddies are stronger and healthier and you know, much more put together physically than the other guys that, you know, ate steaks and what have you, and drank beer and whiskey till they're content, and they're like slobbing around. So there's something there about proper nutritious eating, and so we want to put those basic things in place and see how we do.
Yep.
you know and so and reading is important too. Again, when the pandemic hit, I'll confess my attitude was, here's my logic. I've lived in India, right? It's not the cleanest place in the world, I guarantee it, right? And the immunity that those people have is incredible. And compared to that country, we're about the cleanest. I mean,
Yeah.
you eat off the sidewalk and you'll be fine. And I thought, because we've been so sanitary, maybe it won't affect us as much. That was my thought. And my thought was, this may be a temporary thing, and that's how I adjusted. But it kept going on and on and on. And I thought, okay, so this is longer than I thought. I mean, what do I know? I'm just going by what I'm hearing, which was a mistake looking back. So I started reading, and first book I picked up was a textbook for me when I was in seminary. It's a book by a guy named Viktor Frankl, who survived Auschwitz, right? And I thought, if there's anybody that's going to teach me something, it's going to be him,
Yeah.
right? Because he's been through it and he's survived concentration camp, and who else can teach me about how to survive, horror, that's not even, I mean, I think what we went through is not nearly as bad as that. Don't ever let me say it's the same.
Yeah.
But someone who's gone through much more serious can teach me something. And one of the things he said that really struck me is, when you cannot change your circumstances, you have to allow the circumstances to change who you become.
Mm.
You can use the circumstances to become strong, or you can become weak, bitter, cranky, jaded, cynical. You can become all of that, or you can become strong. The circumstance can make you strong. So that gave me a purpose on how I wanted to go through this. So mentally and emotionally and spiritually, I said, when I come out of this, I want to be stronger, not weaker.
Wow. That makes sense. And it's the right perspective,
Yeah.
even though it's challenging, right?
Mm,
Because of the everything going on. And yet
yeah.
the hardcore reality is we're being changed by this whether we recognize it or not.
Yeah.
Um,
Well, yeah, but what we have a choice in
so to
that. We
that
can change for the worse, or we can change for
change
the
for the
better.
better. Yep. And so what you've laid out, thank you, is some real simple, practical tips to
Mhm.
get back to, or to allow rather recovery to happen.
Yes.
Because recovery is a process. Like you go in the hospital, you have surgery. Afterwards, they put you in a recovery kind of room first before they even let you see people or people see you. There's a
Yes.
time for recovery, and depending on the surgery, determines how long the recovery is, and certain things you can and cannot do while you're in recovery mode. And my fear is that we, especially um, in America, and especially the church in America, is
Hmm.
such in a rush to just run back to, I'm going beyond building, just run back into normal, that we're not allowing for recovery. And some of the wounds and things that we've experienced while being in isolation and going through this, we're not talking about really, we're not dealing with too much. I mean, certain churches are dealing with it, but I'm saying collectively, I
Hmm.
don't know that the body of Christ is really dealing with it. And as a result, I hope I'm wrong, but I think, late summer, fall, as time goes on, that stuff is going to start leaking out in church. And, you're going to have some leaders and some lay people and stuff clashing. And, it could become very toxic because we're not talking about this. We're not dealing with it. We're
Yeah.
not, you know, and
Yeah. Well, I think you hit on something very important there. So now the talk of normal or new normal, it's not what it sounds like, you know, because what I'm hearing, you relay to me what you've heard others do and what you've seen others do. When they're talking about normal or new normal, they're talking about, I want to get back to comfortable again. That was normal.
yep,
I want to get comfortable again.
yep,
I got news. It's not
no,
the deal. It's not the deal.
no,
You know, and when Jesus said, "Look, the foxes have holes and birds have nests. Son of Man doesn't even have a place to lay his head. You want to follow me? That's what it's going to be like. If you're up for it, let's do it." You know, and so normal actually means comfortable. What's comfortable? What's my new idea of comfortable? You know, and comfortable could be that I don't ever show up into church. I just stay in my pajamas and watch the Sunday morning show and check it off and said, "Well, I did it." That I, again, let me. What really helps me is, learning from how God made our physical body. Okay, so if you want to get strong, you're going to have to work out. Okay. You may start with 10 pounds of weightlifting, let's say. You know, you can't stay with 10 pounds for the rest of your life and expect to get strong.
right,
You're going to get only as strong as 10 pounds, right? And so, then you have to move to 15. So the more there is uncomfortableness, which is what it's going to be when you have extra weight, which is resistance, right?
yep,
The more resistance you have, the stronger you become. That you cannot go against that. That's science, if you ask me, in the current language. It's science. You can't go against that. And so if you're looking for something comfortable, which we could say you just want to lift 10 pounds for the rest of your life, well, you just kind of like, mapped out what your life is going to look like. You're not going to be very strong, but God believes in you that you can be stronger than 10 pounds.
yeah,
That's important to understand.
that is huge. And, my grandmother saying was, her generation, I know God, it's an old hymn in church. And she would say, I know God hasn't brought me this far to leave me. And I think we have to take hold of that fact and say, God is not left. God is not abandoning us. What is God saying in this season? What yoke am I taking off? Am I putting on Christ's yoke? Am I allowing for rest? Am I allowing for
Amen.
recovery? And this
Yeah.
this last part I want to talk about is, am I now up for what moving forward looks like? I'm resting, allowing myself to recover, if you will. You know, I'm recharging
Mhm.
now. You know, now what does revival look like? And I don't mean revival in the sense of, the churchy term of
Right.
throwing some evangelistic events and getting a bunch of people back in church. I'm saying in terms of how we live out our kingdom life, that abundant life that Jesus said, I came to give you a life and life more abundantly. Now,
Right.
what does that look like as we revive and reboot? um, into
Mhm.
life and not being, as you said, comfortable, because comfort is gone. You know,
It
comfort
was
is going.
never part of the plan.
It was never part of
Not
the
a,
plan.
it was never part of the kingdom plan. Let me put it that way.
No, it was not. And when Jesus even says here is that you can take off a yoke, you can put his on. It's easy and it's light, but it still requires you to do some things. So as
For sure.
it reboot,
Right.
what do you see, mentally and emotionally, some things that are going to be necessary uh, for us. I think one I'll throw out there is we do have to figure out what community looks like, even in distancing, and in certain ways. But I know there's more. So,
Right.
what
Well,
do you think?
yeah, I would divide that into two, categories. One is personally, and the other one is community. Okay, so of course we want to be safe and prudent and wise about engaging with others and follow some protocols so we don't pass this on. Hopefully, we'll all be vaccinated and we don't have to worry about that. We're not there yet, so we're getting there. Let that be what it is. So now, look, when you and I, any one of us, have gone through something like this, and I can't even imagine, I know some stories, but I don't know all stories. And the stories I've heard are so heartbreaking. You know, it's incredible what people have been through, right? Not only the last year, I think they were going through it before that. The last year, introducing the stress into our lives, exposed, the way we've been living, right? So when you go through this, it ought to change you,
Yeah.
right? Because the Apostle Paul says, after we accept Jesus into our lives as our Savior and we enter into a relationship with Him, the deal is we grow more and more and more into the likeness of Christ. If we want to grow more and more like into the likeness of Christ, we will be tested with situations. Some are extreme, some are not so extreme, but we don't need to worry about how bad it is or how terrible it can be, because that's part of yoke bearing. Jesus's yoke is that I'm with you always. I'll never leave you. I'll never forsake you. I've got you tattooed on my hand. No one's going to take you away from me. Nothing will separate us from God's love, right? And
Yeah.
so, because of that, you know, any trial or tribulation is supposed to change us and make us stronger, which now has a very powerful meaning, because this is how all of the efforts of the enemy to destroy the kingdom backfires on him,
Mm, that's good.
right?
That's
So
good.
God is like, you want to torture my people? They're going to become stronger. You want to torture my people? The church is going to grow. And so individually, we're responsible to look at this and go, God, how do you want me to change? What do you want me to learn from this? Right. And so let's just say fall. I'm just using this for
Yeah.
conversation's sake. I don't know. I don't have any insider information. Let's just say fall. We'll all be vaccinated. We don't have to worry about COVID. But now God has a purpose for your life, and this is part of His this is part of getting to continue to fulfill why God put you on this earth. Through this experience, He's trying to make you stronger to continue to fulfill the purpose that you have in your life. And so, how might the changes that happen through this year bless other people down the road? Minister to other people down the road, make me a deeper follower of Christ, so people just being near me feel the presence and the peace of God, because I carry His yoke. I don't have to perform. I don't have to be famous. I don't have to prove to anybody that I'm good enough to be a minister. I am, because I am the child of God. I am. So wherever I am, He is also, because we walk hand in hand. And so going forward, you have to be asking, so, well, God, how are we not going to waste what we learned in the last year?
Yeah.
Can you and I collude together on how we can do good in this world because of what you put me through? because God does not want to waste an ounce of what you've been through. That's the hope. That's grieving with hope, really, if you ask me. And so, good looking ahead, you always have to look at least for me, this is what I do. I
Yeah.
always look at it from the lens of how is this meant for me to fulfill the purpose that God put me on this earth for?
Mm, that's
You
good.
know,
I,
and I want to
whew.
march forward with that because I want the enemy to be afraid that I'm getting stronger.
Wow, you said something there, and I'm hoping we can show this on the screen, and if
Sure.
anybody's watching, that they will uh, take this question to heart, and that is to ask themselves on the other side of this now, God, what ways are you calling me to uh, be in um, tandem with what you want to do in the kingdom? God, what ways are you calling me to grow stronger as a result of what we've been through?
Mhm.
Um, God, how can I collude with you for kingdom purposes? I love when you
Amen.
said that because
Amen.
those are all things that really Jesus now is inviting them into in this passage. He's saying, now, once you take my yoke on, because a
Mhm.
yoke is still a guide
Mhm.
and it still directs and
Mhm.
leads you down a path. Jesus is just saying, I'm
Right.
taking you now down a different path than what you've been
Right.
down, a path of
Right.
religion, a path of regulations and
Mhm.
restrictions that are not biblical.
Yes.
So now that I'm getting you off that path and leading you to a real relationship with me and
Yes.
others in my kingdom community so that you can impact those who are watching, what
Yes.
ways are you now called to collude and connect with Jesus and what he's doing in his kingdom? I think those are questions that we as
Yeah.
individuals have to answer. I think those are things that we have to consider as a community of believers. Because if we
Yeah.
don't, all of
Yeah.
this is wasted.
All of this is wasted. In again, when I mean we've gone through it and we're still, I don't know, 2/3 or half where we are, but wherever we are, what matters to us as human beings is that there's meaning behind what we go through in life.
Yep.
You know, what is the meaning of this? That I couldn't say goodbye to my friend, my loved one, my dad, my mom, my wife, my uncle, my aunt, my friend. What is the meaning of this?
Yeah.
In a way, you've asked God, why? Why did you do this? Not because you're challenging God. You just want to understand why.
Yeah. And that highlights something. I think it's important to know, especially in this season, we can ask why. Not that we couldn't before, but I think sometimes religion has taught us you don't ask God questions.
He loves questions, especially why questions.
Yeah, you don't ask why, you just roll with it. And I think that is been so detrimental, especially right now,
Yeah.
because it's too much unknown happening to not wonder. You
It's natural to wonder
Yeah,
why.
you would have to go against the grain of how you're wired to not wonder and to not ask why, not to, as you said, sift through and try and seek and find out what it is God is saying in this season. So,
Yeah.
um,
Because I mean, Jesus does it too, in that the why question isn't always, again, I think the problem with the church teaching that you don't ask that is because every time you ask why, it's seen as you're being defiant, right?
yeah,
Look, you can ask why because you're curious too. You
right,
know, my God, why have you forsaken me? It's coming up next Friday.
right,
Think about that. Why have you forsaken me? He's like, Jesus is utterly bewildered in his suffering that the dad would look the other way. And he's going, I didn't expect this. Why are you doing that? Can we say he was defiant? I don't think so.
yeah,
Because he settled this in the Garden of Gethsemane when he was like bleeding to death, really. It's his sweat and blood. And he's saying, is there any way? Is there any way we can do this and not have to go through this? But he says, but not my will, so that your will be done. I'll
yeah,
submit to that.
Yeah.
So to suffer in front of God is not unsightly to him. It's actually welcome. And that is where he has the opportunity to show himself to be who he is. And what else can make your yoke easy than to have the presence of God to step into your suffering? Say, I'm here for you.
Yeah. 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 And I
And you
think
don't have to do this alone.
no, and that's where I was going with it. When we take on this yoke, we now have a committed partner, protector, provider
Yeah,
who will not let us go, who
yeah,
will be with us through the highs and the lows and
yeah.
through whatever even comes next after this.
Oh
He
yeah,
will be there. And so I'm
yeah.
hoping
He
somebody
will be
watching
there.
this gets that today, that he
But
will be
again,
there.
yeah, in Matthew, I think it's in Matthew where Jesus is describing what's going to happen at the end of the world. He's
Yep.
saying this is going to happen. You know what he says right after that? He says, "See to it that you're not afraid." He said, "Make sure you're not scared." That's what he's saying, and he's describing something much worse than COVID. Okay,
Yep.
and so how do we get there? It's the yoke, And so one might ask, if it's that easy, why aren't we all picking it up? Well, that's a great question, and here's the answer to that. At least from my end of things, is that faith.
Yeah.
It takes a ton of faith that it's easier than it needs to be, because we want to do things on our own terms.
Yep.
you know so it takes a lot of faith to believe that the yoke can be easy, even if the terrain is really tough. But we have all our rules, and if I, as long as I follow this, I did this, I did this, I did this, well, I'm good, aren't I? Jesus says no, that it had nothing to do with faith. You don't believe me still?
Yeah. Yeah. So I listen.
Wow.
This is good, and I want to kind of end it like this because we got to wrap up. But we're
Sure.
gonna have to do this again.
Oh man, I love talking about this. I love helping people. I love bringing perspective.
I listen. If you're not gleaning anything from this, shame on you. This is not on God or
Yeah,
us. This is on you.
yeah,
Um,
it's rich.
it is, and it's right out of Scripture. And
Hmm.
so, here's how I kind of want to land the plane.
Hmm.
If you take the next few moments, because there's somebody who's going to watch this when it in its freshness, and then somebody's going to watch it later. Um, and may wonder, okay, I get what they're saying. I get what Ben is speaking. But what's the easy step to take or the next step? And then you may have a person watching who is in agreement, like in Steph has been doing some of these things and just needs a little encouragement. Would you take these last few moments and kind of speak to both audiences on whatever God has put on your heart? It doesn't have to be out of Matthew 11 at all.
Yeah.
Just, as we're heading into, like you mentioned, Good Friday. We call it good, even though it was horrifying for Jesus. Good
Yeah.
for us,
Yeah.
horrifying for him.
Right.
As we're heading into that, you know, what would you
Well,
say?
the biggest thing for me, that's grounding. I look for what grounds me. What keeps what can I stand on? What holds my feet? What holds me up? What grounds me? It is. It's beautiful that we're coming into this week. And if when all the suffering and all of this is put into perspective, it really is about ultimately God saying, "I'm so crazy about you. I love you, and I'll do anything." And I did anything, including giving up my own son, because I want us to be good together. I want to be close to you. I want you to want to be close to me. You don't have to be afraid. That's huge. You
Yeah,
know, God is crazy about you, and He put you on this earth for a reason. That's the second thing. Because He put you on this earth for a reason, everything you go through has a meaning. right? And so, because it has meaning, you don't need to lose hope, because none of what you go through will be wasted. I guarantee it. That is true to for me in my life. Big things, small things, medium things, things that crushed me. You know, on certain days and weeks, and sometimes it crushed me for years. And I can sit here and I can confidently say it will not go to waste.
Mm. Amen.
Okay. And so, because of that, you can have hope, because God wants to use you, because He made you for a reason. Somewhere I read, what are the odds of someone exactly like you being born? 400 trillion to one.
Mm.
Those are the odds of
Wow.
someone exactly like you being born. you know and so we can talk about snowflakes and nothing is the same again. It's all fun. But okay, so 400 trillion to one, what does that mean? No one can do what you can do, because of how God made you. And so now, will you come to God fearlessly and say, I want this easy yoke, and I do want to fulfill what you put me on this earth. Some of you know what it is, some of you don't know what it is. If you don't know what it is, it's not weakness to ask, to say, look, I don't know, can you show me? But I've been through this horrific year, not just me, all of us. But please, let's not waste this. you know and so now there's purpose, there's meaning, there's hope for your suffering, because suffering makes you stronger
Yeah.
if you allow it. And please don't go the bitter, cynical, questioning God. What the hell, is he even real? You could go down that path. You can. I can't stop you, but I know where that takes you. You're like, the evil one just took you out of the game. Well, what are you going to do now? So there is meaning to all this. And the meaning for me might not be the same meaning for you, wherever you're at in your life, in your spiritual walk with God and your friends and your church family. Keep asking these questions. Make sure that you're taking care of yourself. That's important. If you're not healthy, then you won't hear anything.
Yeah.
You won't see anything. you know and so basic things are important, and some of the richer things we've talked about, that's also important. But don't rush through this. Be patient and say, hold your hands open, say, God, I'm here, I'm
Yeah.
listening, I'm listening.
That's good. Well,
Yeah,
listen,
yeah,
thank you so much.
my pleasure,
Um,
man.
it's
I
always good
wouldn't
when we
miss
get
this for
together.
anything. I'm telling you, it means a lot to me that you invited me to share with you my heart and my journey. And I'm praying that God will use that to encourage others. And I'm so grateful. Thank you.
Thank you. Listen,
Mhm.
um, anybody who you've got more questions, email us at the tabernacle at yahoo.com. We welcome your questions. Let's
Amen.
have dialogue
Yeah.
together. If you
Yeah.
want to talk, you can connect with us by calling 314-643-6624. And this information will come up at the end of this, but shoot across now and you can connect with us. Again, Ben, thank you. Love you,
You're
brother.
welcome. Love you too. I
And
love
look forward to when we get to do this again. Have
you.
a
Yeah.
great evening, all
Anytime.
who are watching, and stay tuned because there will be some follow up to this.
Yeah. Anytime. Anytime. I'm available. Anytime. I'll make time for you guys. And God bless.
Awesome.